we are back on this December the 11th, commemorating the 231st anniversary of the trial of Louis XVI, the King of France, the last King of France, for treason. Stay tuned in about a month from now, on January the 21st, to hear about the results of that trial. But what we are doing for today instead is talking about our weekly update, our weekly checkup on how things are going in the meta, in the season. This time around, we are looking first at the raid over Mythic Plus, which we will check on tomorrow. So, the most surprising thing for today about the situation in the meta is that we are not gonna get any type of balance tuning this week. We have been getting a couple of back-to-back resets with some nerfs and some buffs to certain specs, even to some Mythic Plus dungeons and to some bosses. However, at least so far, planned for this incoming reset, we are not actually getting anything when it comes to the power of the specs. So as we go and look at the current results of the specs in the raid, for example, so there is a bit less excitement about it because we are not waiting for any type of incoming buffs or incoming nerfs to some of these specs, for example. Besides the lack of excitement though, we continue to see that we are in a quite melee-heavy meta, or rather than melee-heavy, an anti-caster meta, because when you look at the top, you have all three of the rogue specs, and then you have Havoc, and then you have Enhancement, you also have Beast Mastery and Marksmanship Hunter, which are not casters, they don't get the caster treatment. You also have Fury Warrior high up in there. There is a random Survival Hunter popping by in the top half of the results, which basically makes the only couple of proper casters in the top 10, top 11 even, of specs being Elemental and Demo. All of the other proper classic standard casters, from Affliction to Destro to Balance to Shadow Priest to all three of the mage specs, are now not doing nearly as well. Also worth mentioning that when you scroll down and you check the popularity, it's not even that Elemental is doing that well while also being a quite popular spec. They're not even getting that treatment right now. Not much is changing in case you're interested to see what the top performers are actually looking like in terms of results. That's why I don't often check up on these results. We go from all logs available in Mythic raiding down to only the top 10%, and you can see that we are basically having more or less the same specs in the top results. It's not really much of any difference right now in terms of who is performing better depending on their level, the quality of their parses. The results are similar. The tier lists generated by these type of results right now are also somewhat on a similar level when it comes to the raid. You have Beast Mastery as well as Havoc as well as Demo in a tier list. This one is from u.gg. Then you have the one from Subcreation, which sees Beast Mastery as well as Demo as well as Havoc again in the S tier. The only change is Assassination in here being considered right below the S tier, whereas on Subcreation is straight up together with Havoc. It's a question to be had, right? As you can see here, Assassination is actually showing up with the highest average damage across all of the other specs, even above the top 3 in terms of performance. And of course, if you look at just straight up the actual results in terms of logs, Assassination is by quite a good margin ahead of any other spec. And we can't even have the same treatment of Elemental or Marksmanship, where we say, well, they don't really count. It's not really a serious log because Marksmanship is here, Elemental is here, you know, they are niche picks, niche results. Assassination is here. Assassination is literally the second most played melee spec, and it's also doing the best. So it's definitely a much more relevant and valid result for Assassination. It can be found even scrolling casually as you go deeper down the bosses. You see more and more Assassination rogues showing up in the top results, more so than many other specs. What is interesting though, as we mentioned, there have been no planned buffs or nerfs for this reset, but we did have some buffs and nerfs the previous reset. So maybe something changed now because of the changes and the buffs or nerfs we got the week before that. So, okay, fine, let's have a comparison. This is the current result of the DPS right now, and this was the result right a week ago after certain specs received changes. Which changes? Well, we got number 1, Windwalker Monk, for example, was buffed to do 6% more damage across the board. So we thought that, oh, okay, the 173,000 being buffed by 6% should be going up technically by about 8 to 9,000 more. So we can expect a 182-ish thousand damage for Windwalker. Right now, it's not quite that. Right now, the damage increase of those buffs did not get to be nearly as big. But to be fair, we can also say that it's not that these results are directly linking to being buffed or being nerfed. Most of those can be just because certain specs are now facing a new boss, a different boss where they might be doing worse. If you look at the differences here, for example, Enhancement Shaman is going from 193,000 to 197. It wasn't buffed whatsoever. Balanced Druid is going from 180,000 average DPS to 184,000, and they weren't buffed. Marksmanship, talking about the volatility of the logs of Marksmanship, went from 217,000 all the way down to 204,000. Out of nowhere, they lost 7% damage just because. Really, no other reason. So these slight, small fluctuations in damage might not really be conclusive as to how the specs are performing based on the balancing of last week. Still though, it's a bit sad that we're not gonna get any balancing this week, this time around, to see if some specs get some changes based on their situation, because of course some of these specs continue to have some not so good results in the raid, and to the annoyance of others, there have been some overperformers to which some players have been wondering, why are they not being touched? Why are they not being nerfed? They are clearly the ones that are performing way above the rest, way above the cut compared to other specs. We have been just noticing the fact that the nerfs to Havoc or Beast Mastery, for example, did not really amount to much, so we would have needed to get a bit more. The same goes at this point, the same concept for the casters that we touched on the beginning of the video. As you keep scrolling down, you keep seeing more and more of these casters in terms of their state right now, from basically all of the mage specs to the Devastation Evoker being closed down by the existence of augmentation, to the no longer part of Exodia Shadow Priest nowadays not doing nearly as well, the two Warlock specs not called Demonology. So it's not a good time right now for the majority of the casters not named Demo, and honestly I would bump in Balanced Druid as well. Yes, Balanced Druid doesn't look like they will be having a nice time trying to be in for Tindral and for Farak at the current moment, but beyond those two bosses they are doing fine as a spec. Talking about the weekly results, last week we stopped at Smolderon. We pointed out we have been starting to get at least a few more logs up to this, because even now in this week, almost a month into the raid, if you check the amount of parses on Smolderon, which starts to include multiple guilds who have been now killed Smolderon, twice on the reset, on the reclear. Even then, you can see the amount of parses on this boss are still quite few. The amount of DPS combined is probably less than 100 total parses on the fight. You can also see, as a result, many of the logs here are being quite volatile and unpredictable because there are such few results on the fight. So it's much harder to gauge the power of the specs, right? So even while looking just at logs, of course, going past Smolderon is going to be even more random. This is Tindral, there was a grand total of 3 guilds showing the results on Warcraft logs on Tindral. So up to this point, when it comes to analyzing the logs, the public logs, you are basically still stuck at either Nimue or Lardar. These two bosses with, way more parses, giving you a way better idea of the situation of many of the specs, because you have way more entries of the results of the specs on these bosses. As mentioned, nerfs and buffs did not really do too much, and we were expecting more, and unfortunately on this reset we are not going to be getting more when it comes to any type of tuning, at the very least for now. I still have next to me my dear cans of Hopium to inhale, expecting some last minute changes in this reset in terms of balancing, but for now this is the situation of the melee heavy, non-caster heavy meta of the raid. We can spend not too much, but just a little bit talking about healers instead over the DPS we just went over. For healers, we did also have a change, because we had Mystery Monk nerfed, and we had Holy Priest buffed, and we also had a couple of other buffs, but these were for damage for Paladin and for Restoration Shaman. So, in terms of healing, the nerf was to Mistweaver because of this. This was the reason why Mistweaver was nerfed, and it has been a week, and Mistweaver is still there. So, it's not really changing much in terms of results, really. This was the result last week in terms of HPS of the healers before the changes. These are the results at the almost end of this week of the healers in terms of HPS. We can see that after a nerf, which could have been for Mistweaver upwards of 5+% less healing done, they went from 204 to 207, so they are actually healing even more now, as well as Holy Priest, going from 167,000 to 174. So at the very least for them, there is a reason for this growth because of their healing buff received recently. As mentioned for the DPS, neither did the nerf to Mistweaver or the buff to Holy show up in these results. Because if you look at Resto Shaman, not buffed in healing, they increased their HPS by 5,000. Discipline was nerfed by 3% and they went up by 4,000 HPS. Resto Druid wasn't touched at all and they went up by 7,000 HPS. Same goes for Preservation, who went up by 4,000. So, not really any noticeable changes. These fluctuations in HPS are likely to do with more guilds starting to kill bosses that have higher HPS requirements, so the overall HPS of the healers will go up as a result. If you look at the average numbers for the bosses, you will find here the HPS requirements. And you see, for example, that as you get into Smolderon and then Tindral, the HPS requirements increase heavily. So the more guilds that get in there, the more healing will be required of your healers, and therefore the more HPS overall will show up in the overall results. But for now, in terms of visible changes on all bosses, Mistweaver is still clearly the one ahead even after the nerfs, and Holy Priest is still clearly the one below everyone else even after the buffs. That's the situation right now for healers. Once more, still worth reminding that this doesn't really reflect always the power of the healers. Just looking at the HPS doesn't mean too much. In this case, Mistweaver is first. It's still comfortably behind both Holy Paladin and Discipline in popularity. Resto Shaman continues to pump as an HPS throughput consistent healer, yet it's easily the least popular of the healers at the moment. So the HPS of healers has a smaller impact on just how meta they are compared to flat out the top damage of a DPS spec. That's the main difference when it comes to the healers compared to the DPS. For the TLDR of the current update on the weekly results of the raid is that we have gotten changes last week, but they did, for the moment, not really impact the situation in the meta too much. And, unfortunately, for now, doesn't look like we will be getting changes this incoming weekly reset. Quite a disappointing update for this week. No real major surprise, no voices in the corridor about a certain spec starting to scale with item level and become a hidden OP spec out of nowhere. For now, we have nothing like that. For now, it's still rather consistent with what we have seen last week in terms of results in the raid for this almost beginning of the 5th reset of the season. So, with this out of the way, I'm going to leave you all guys to this Monday, I believe it is. So, thanks of course as usual to all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which can as usual also be given completely for free. You can like and comment down below as well as subscribe to the channel itself. And with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I tried with the new lights, and I think it might be just a little bit too much. Jesus.